which is a nice topic for a seminar, but to be more accurate, they didn't just say for the most people, for all living entities, for all living beings, because the culture that this practice called Bhakti Yoga or devotional service comes from considers all living beings coming from a one divine origin. We all come from the same divine source. Balaram, one thing is, this is sliding by degrees down, and I can fight it, but if we have somebody with an IQ, then maybe we can solve it. If anybody wants to go into business and design a microphone that can withstand an ISKCON temple, you'll be very wealthy. Thank you. The basis of understanding in the topic of how to treat people is given in an ancient book called Bhagavad Gita, which is a dialogue between Krishna, who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and his student, who was his friend, but turned to Krishna as a refuge and took instruction from him, which thus brought forth the Bhagavad Gita. And in that book, Krishna says that a wise person, a person who's learned, in fact the word now has become popular in English, pundit. Pundit is somebody who knows something about something. And a pundit, or a wise person, Krishna says, is one who sees that we all come from the same original divine source, and that the bodies that we're temporarily inhabiting now, whether it be animal, human, plant, these are temporary abodes, like a vehicle. And the person who has this vision isn't prejudiced against not only people who look different, but also other species. And in the Bhagavad Gita also, in the section on meditation, which is chapter 6, Krishna says such people naturally develop a sense of compassion, or specifically says empathy. Atmau pamyena sarvatra samam pashyati arjuna sukham va yadiva dukham sa yogi paramo mataha. And that means that a person who sees others as being in the same boat. Have you ever heard that saying? We're all in the same boat?
Yes. Yes.
It's pretty true, right? That's what Krishna says in this verse, that a person who realizes that we're all subject to the same tribulations, and also we aspire for comfort, happiness in this world. We all have similar aspirations. And not just as humans, but also animals. Animals want to be happy too, right? You ever met any living entity that didn't want to be happy? Or at least preserve his or her life? Even an ant. If you put your foot out in a non-violent way, just as an experiment, and the ant sees your foot, will go around it. Spiders generally protect themselves. I had a conversation once with one who was sitting on my desk when I walked in, and I said, "Hey, how are you?" And he looked at me like, "Yeah, how are you and what are you doing here?" It's like, "Well, I do stuff here." And he goes, "So do I." But, he kind of could understand that I had a lot of power over him being a lot bigger. I said, "Don't worry, I like spiders and other people like you." But he turned around and ran away. And I felt this communion with that spider in the sense that he's just like me. How did he have the wherewithal to turn around and run away and just go back to his home? He wanted to be comfortable wherever he lives, in a little corner somewhere or a wall, whatever. And he wanted to go on with his livelihood, which, by the way, he did quite handily. He could build an amazing web without a degree from Georgia Tech. No masters, no PhD. It's like, yeah, this is what I do. This is how I live. And a person who's a pundit, who's learned, sees everyone to be in the same boat. We all want happiness. We all want to be protected from death or harm to our bodies. And such a person then has a sense that empathy, pathy means to feel, M means within. You see what's in other people, and you can not just empathize, commiserate, many ways in which you can feel for other people. And so the sages at this seminar, which was advertised as being for discerning what's the greatest good for all living beings, came there and had discussion. They appointed a person they thought was most qualified to lead the class and facilitate everything. His name was Sutta Goswami. And the reason they said that Sutta Goswami was very qualified is because he had sincerely studied the science of self-realization. And he had many excellent teachers. What's more, he was very humble and open to learning. And just by those qualifications, by sitting and listening to excellent teachers, being very humble and open, he'd become eminently qualified to teach this very important seminar. And they came to some conclusions early on. In other words, Sutta Goswami, who was asked to speak on this topic, gave a summary of the main points, bullet points to start off with. Sages who were assembled there asked him questions, and then he answered them. Actually, the answers are quite detailed and lengthy. How lengthy, you might ask? Mightn't you? 18,000 verses and beautiful poetry written in Sanskrit emanated from that seminar. And early on, he gave a few points that are easy to take with us and consume and have a point of reference for how to work in the world to bring out one's highest potential and also to work among other people in a fruitful way. And concerning how people could be happy and well-adjusted in their lives, he said, Savai pumsam parodharmo yato bhaktiradhoksije ahaitukya pratiyata yayatma suprasidati. We said that the greatest benefit for everyone, Savai pumsam parodharmo, is I feel better already. Yeah, I felt a little distant. Man, this is better. Thank you. This is a good directive, and that is to give one's love and attention to the Supreme. And then they also gave definitions of who the Supreme is. So they said that the Supreme is the source of everything, that from whom everything else emanates. And there's also variety within the complete whole of the Supreme. In other words, everything emanates from the Supreme, and therefore everything's part of the Supreme. But there's variety within that complete whole. So Sutta says, as he's fleshing out the answer, he says, Vedanti tattva vidas, tattvam yaj jnanam advayam, brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti shabdyate. And that is that the ultimate goal of life is to give one's loving attention to the Supreme. And then he said the Supreme manifests in three features, three major features. One is called Brahman, or the powerful spiritual energy of the Lord, nondescript energy. And then he said there's another feature of the Supreme, which is the way in which God enters into this world. And one of the ways that he enters is within the hearts of every living being. And in that feature, he's called Suhrit, or the best friend. His intention is, as a best friend, to give guidance to those who are in an unfamiliar place, and the material world's an unfamiliar place to spiritual beings. And the third is that there's a very beautiful and personal form of the Supreme, which is given, or that particular description is in the word Bhagavan, or the source of all beauty, all other kinds of attractions, all emanate from that beautiful form of the Supreme. So the Supreme has form. And then there's a way in which he describes the qualities of those who can perform devotional service. First of all, he says it's quite natural for us to think of the Supreme and to offer our service and our worship. And that if we're able to do so in an uninterrupted way, it's not stopping and then starting at some time. And also, we don't want anything in return. We're doing it because we're naturally grateful. Starts with a feeling of gratitude. We're grateful for our existence, and we offer service. That matures in a sense of love, and it's exhibited through selfless service. He said if you're able to imbibe these qualities or develop them, hear about them, develop them, first of all, it's not unnatural, it's the natural condition of the self or the soul, then you'll be happy. It's good to know, right? It seems to be a mystery, or it seems to be a mystery in the world. There are alternative ideas, unlimited alternative ideas, although they seem to all be in can be placed in two categories: material happiness or spiritual happiness. Like if you were just going to, off the top of your head, say where you'd be more happy, in material happiness or spiritual happiness, what would you just instinctively say?
Spiritual happiness.
Yeah, maybe this is in statistics you'd be like, if you're doing a poll or something like that, the population I have here is prejudiced. But actually, I read about a study that was done in Canada of over 40,000 students, and they asked them if it's better to give or receive. What do you think they said?
Receive.
No, they said it's better to give. Maybe that's just Canadians, I don't know. So, people generally around holiday time, they feel a little elated because they're thinking about giving things to other people. And you'll see banners here and there. Of course, they're meant to sell things oftentimes, but the idea is better to give than to receive. It's something that people intuit. Or even if, they're better at receiving than giving, they still feel that it's more noble to give than to receive. Why do we have that? Because that's our nature. And who do we give to? Well, oftentimes you give people something and they're thinking, oh no, not another one of these. I didn't want that. And it's hard for people to take. Not everybody can take what we offer, and they don't always appreciate it. There have been movements around the world where people say, like, here's the perfect philosophy, take it. And people go, no, I don't think so. And it's like, no, take it or we'll kill you. I mean, there's, the history in the world. You just look it up and people say, no, you have to take it. It's like, no, I don't want to. So it's not so easy for people to take. But Krishna, one of the meanings of the word Krishna is the one who can accept everything that we give. And he especially accepts our loving intention. Even if you get the details wrong. That's kind of nice too, because that doesn't work oftentimes. Of course, like a mother's love. If a child comes with a little flower and it got crushed on the way in, it's half broken or something like that, but the child's so sincere and said, I got this for you. And the child unrooted it from the garden that the mother just planted anyway. And then half the petals fell off. But she doesn't care. She looks at the flower and she looks at her child and goes, oh. You know, it's the best thing that ever happened to her. When my mother left, I was with her when she left, and afterwards, because my father had left before that, I was with my other siblings and we had to sort out all the things they left behind. And I found little caches of things that she had saved from when I was a kid. One of the things she saved was the first note I ever wrote her from second grade. It was on one of those pieces of paper with huge, what do they call the linings, so that you can really have a lot of room to make mistakes. And I just learned how to write. And I came home and I wanted to go to my friend's house, but she wasn't home, so I left her a note. And it said, my friend's name was Lance. So I wrote, I at Lance. And it melted her heart. And so much so, it melted my heart when I saw she kept it her whole life. She had it in a special box. This little note that I wrote it with. The grammar wasn't correct, but the feeling was there. And so the science of bhakti is so natural because we want to give, we feel happy when we give, but who can we give to? And how do we give? We give with our heart. And Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that if you take an item like an apple or a flower and you just offer it to me with love, then I'll accept it. And in that acceptance, there's this sense of connection to the Supreme. So that's one of the ways in which the process of devotional service is tangible. People offer something to the Supreme. When I was in high school, I started getting interested in spiritual topics, and a friend of mine gave me in 1972, a small copy of an edition of Bhagavad Gita that just had translations. And so I had been reading it and really fascinated with it. And in it, I read this verse where Krishna said, offer me a leaf, a flower, fruit, or water, and I'll accept it. So I was walking to school one day, and I had a lunch bag, like kids are supposed to have. And yet, I reached in, there was an apple. That sounds also cliche. But I pulled the apple out, and I stopped halfway up the hill to my high school. I said, I'm going to try this. And I just held it up. And, I was offering it. Whatever way I knew, I read it, and I said, well, I'm going to try offering it. And I just remember standing there on that hill and holding out this apple and saying, would you please accept this? And I felt this overwhelming sense of connection. So the science of bhakti is very simple. It's natural. It's something that we already know something about. In fact, being humans, we know a lot about it because that's what we do. We cook for people and invite them over, right? Yes. At least that's what I've been experiencing this week. and we like to sing, right? Humans like to sing. There's concert halls all over Atlanta. People get together and they like to go to a concert and they want to hear somebody sing a song. Songs open our hearts. Music, tune. You can't live without music. You know that, right? Right? Yeah. No, life doesn't make sense without music and rhythm. And so if we have to have it or we'll go mad. We have to have aesthetic beauty or we'll become stifled in life. So we know all these things naturally and we aspire for them all. So it's not something that we don't know, but what the sages said was direct your love towards the Supreme. And not only will Krishna, the Supreme, accept it, but also he'll reciprocate. And he reciprocates in a way that satisfies not only the giver, but also everybody who's involved in the whole process of manufacturing something, creating it, giving it, because it's like watering the root of a tree. When you water the root, then naturally leaves and branches flourish. So Krishna's the root. So if you give to him, he says, Bhoktaram yagatapasam, gyatpamam shantam richti. By giving to me, then you're watering the root, and you'll feel satisfied, and everybody else will feel satisfied with the way you did it. and ultimately. And as far as service goes, when we serve, we feel happy because that's our constitutional position. And an example that our founder, Acharya Srila Prabhupada, gave frequently was that a tiny screw, when connected to the machine in which it's meant to serve, is connected, then it's invaluable. If it falls out and is estranged from the original machine that it was working for, then if you find that screw on the streets of Atlanta, stuck in a crevasse somewhere on the sidewalk, and you pick it up, you won't get even a few cents for it on, what's that thing called, that trading place? eBay. Yeah, try selling it on eBay. I have one tiny screw that I found. It's from the streets of Atlanta. How much will you give me? Not much. And in a similar way, when we're connected to Krishna in service, then we feel our lives to be inestimably valuable at every moment, and with an increasing value in service. But when we're disconnected and we don't know where to apply our service, then there's a natural way that we feel, oh, I really don't have much value. We have to prop ourselves up. It's a hard endeavor to realize, to see where I fit in the world. So the sages gave these very clear ideas that through engaging in service and giving loving offerings to the Supreme, then we would naturally feel happy. And then the rest of the book goes into a lot of detail about the Supreme, because sometimes people then question, well, how do you know who the Supreme is? And what are the qualities of the Supreme? Where would I find this person? And so forth. And in the ultimate issue, the Supreme is the origin of everything, and therefore must have what his creation also has. We have form and personality, therefore he also has form and personality. And that's big news, because most people, through just trying to speculate, ultimately conclude that the Supreme is impersonal. And it's really hard to offer something to an impersonal entity, or imagine how an impersonal entity would come up with a detailed creation like we see before us. Like, who designed the avocado? Who could imagine an avocado would come about by chance? It's got a perfect wrapper on it. It's easy to grip. Perfectly preserves what's inside. And it peels off from the inside, and then you have another seed, you can grow another tree. I mean, who thought of that? There's so many ways in which, when we look at the beauty of the creation and just the sheer engineering skill, it leads us to this understanding of an intelligence. And intelligence is an impersonal. I always was confused when I read books of philosophy that said that the Supreme is impersonal. And that's because they said you should pray, offer prayers and things like that. And they said, many of them, that you are the Supreme. And then I thought, then how am I offering prayers to myself? But the first book I ever saw, actually it was in a magazine called Back to Godhead magazine, in which there was an advertisement for the book called Shriya Shapanishad, where the advertisement said, actually the Supreme is a person. And I sat there for several minutes thinking, somebody finally came out and said that. Because there are other spiritual systems that say that, well, there is a God and there's a representative of God, but they don't actually say, they don't want to give any details, like we're not going to talk about that. Or, they're one and the same, but they're not the same, and I'm trying to understand, like, well, who is it? But this, it seemed like almost audacious proclamation that, no, God's a person. Unabashed. No apologies, no ifs, ands, or buts, just like, no, God's a person. And I thought, wow, there's some power behind that, because who would have I'm trying to think of an appropriate word, but I'm thinking of Yiddish right now, like chutzpah. Huh? What?
Chutzpah.
Chutzpah, yeah. Okay, yeah. Chutzpah, I don't think everybody gets that. Who would have the courage to, just make a bold statement like that? So I said I have to investigate that. And Shriya Shapanishad is a great book in which to understand the nature of the Supreme. It's not an ordinary person. One of the verses in the Shriya Shapanishad says, Tarejati tannaijati tadure tadvantike tarantarasya sarvasya tarusarfasya sibhayatara. Supreme is far away, he's very near as well, he's within everything, and yet he's outside of everything. It's not like an ordinary person. He has a personal form, he has intelligence, he loves and is loved, but he's not like I am, not limited. His form is unlimited and unlimitedly beautiful and can be everywhere at the same time. He's omniscient and omnipresent. And so there's a science behind that also. And when that comes into focus, that understanding that there is a person who's my best friend, who's my supporter in all ways, and who just wants a loving relationship, then there's a happy prospect in life that, yeah, there's a place where I can give my love, or in the beginning, some of my resources to see how it feels to give there. And then one discovers, as an example in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that try to be absorbed in loving service to me, and if you can't do that, then practice doing it the way other people have done it. And if you can't do that, then give some of what you already are holding on to as a gift to help other people spread knowledge about Krishna, and see how that feels. And he said, well, if you can't do that for some reason, and we could think of a few reasons, but we don't have a long class today. He says, just try to volunteer somewhere. Sign up for something where you're not getting paid and nobody knows you're doing it, and see how you feel then. These are all Krishna saying these things. And then you try some of these things, and he's like, wow, I do feel better. I do have more knowledge. I gave away what I was attached to, and now I seem to be a happier person. So there's a gradual way that one can enter into this and progressively come to this level of happiness in life, of feeling like the screw back in the machine, having ultimate purpose in life, and feeling that what I give makes a difference, and that I'm also fulfilling the purpose of my life. That's important also, because although we may have immediate economic needs or desires or relationship needs, there's an ultimate purpose to life. And when we forget about that, then it comes as a great shock. That, what did I do? So oftentimes people get to the end of their life. I was reading this book when I was doing some research. This woman compiled about what people say when their life is about over. And that's when they get all their great ideas about being charitable, and I should have been a nicer person, I should have done more. They never say, like, God, I wish I had gone into work on my day off to please my boss more, or if I just had a little more money. It all becomes insignificant in the context that, I came, I had a little opportunity to learn something here, and now I'm leaving, but I didn't do much. And one can feel desperately a sense of desperation and failure. So it's a great opportunity to read the Bhagavad Gita, the Shriya Shapanishad, the Srimad Bhagavatam, and realize that there are well-reasoned ways in which one can apply one's energy in this lifetime and feel completely happy and useful, and as if one's moving towards the ultimate purpose of life. And as we read this morning, when we had a little reading circle, And one doesn't have to, you don't have to quit your day job. You can go on working, going to school, whatever you have to do, but you can apply these principles even as you're managing what you have to manage in your regular life, which is, you know, you have financial obligations, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That you have to keep up with, right?
Yes.
And if you didn't say yes, see me afterwards, because I got some investments for you in Bhagavatams and things like that. And so Prabhupada, our founder Acharya, had this wisdom, and he came to teach it because he had this sense that if people could use what they have now in service to the Supreme, then it would be great for the world. America was prospering. You know, when I was born, things looked pretty rosy around the world because the wars were over for a little while, and there was a huge expanse in the economy and in development of technologies and manufacturing and things like that. And so around the time that Prabhupada came to America, it was around 1965, there was a lot of opportunity. And he wanted to use the resources of America and combine it with the wisdom that came from the East, from Bhagavad Gita. He compared it to a lame man and a blind man. And he said the two could work together to do good for the world. That was his ultimate purpose. He wanted to expand this simple but sublime technology, spiritual technology, so that people could take advantage of it all over the world. So that's what our organization is. It's really an educational organization. It's meant to take this consolidated wisdom and put it in forms that people can read, classes they can take, ways that they can integrate it into their lives, the actual practice, and see how it feels. And that's basically what ISKCON is. It's an international society where we try to translate everything into the language and culture of the different regions of the world and give everyone an opportunity to join. And that was also the vision of the sages at Naimisaranya. They wanted that for the world. After all, these are people, they don't see distinctions like I like these people, I don't like these people. They love everyone because they love their source, and we're all part of the source. That's a point that we were talking about in the car on the way over here. So these are a few preliminary thoughts in a rambling sort of way. But I thought, as an introduction, maybe then we have a few minutes. You could reflect back any point that caught your ear, or you can ask a question. If you comprehended a point to the degree where you thought that, there's exceptions to this, or probably it won't work in my life, even though it's supposed to, what do I do about that? Not trying to give you questions to use, but especially those are a little contentious, so try to ask me easy stuff. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, why don't you reflect back what you heard, anything you heard, concept or a sentence that you feel was something you could use, maybe carry around in your pocket. We'll give you a microphone and you can be on a worldwide broadcast here.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
So we have some nice customers and handymen and that help us Christians. Very, very nice, pious, very helpful. And they appreciate a lot of our philosophy until the point where they're like, it's all, they're like surprised to hear the philosophy. But because, their teachings say that if it's not through Christ, then there's kind of like a blockage there. Really good friends over the years, and they appreciate hearing and everything, but then it's like doesn't go past that point. So how do you help like people like that? Not envious, but stuck?
Well, everyone comes from different backgrounds, obviously. It's an obvious statement, but they have, because of that, different perspectives. And they take, according to the understanding they have, it takes some time to assimilate another culture. It's not so easy to do that. People who are immediately attracted, sometimes come from the same culture, or also sort of a clean slate. They didn't already have an idea. I mean, this is something to simplify this in a way. When somebody comes to, there's a story about a master musician and teacher, and then teaching sitar. And the student comes and the teacher says, "So what do you know about sitar so far?" And says, "Well, I've been playing 10 years. I just want to get better." He's like, "Okay, thank you. You can sit over there." And another person comes and says, "I've never touched it before." So in discussing with the two, he says, "Okay, one with 10 years experience, I'll teach you." And he says, "So how long till I become a master?" And he says, "It'll take you a few lifetimes." And then with the novice who asked, "So what should I expect? It must be worse." And he said, No, within a very short amount of time you can play." And the other one becomes, "What are you talking about? I already know this, of most of it." And they say, "Yeah, that's the problem, because you already have a preconceived idea." People don't easily give up their sense of culture or their context from which they see something. So then, well, how do people assimilate something new? Either syncretize it by taking in partially and mixing it with what they have, or just making a quantum leap into another universe of thought. These are, you can measure this in many different ways. People, generally, living entities become attached to a particular brand or something like that. It's not so easy to change them. So how do they change? Generally by inculcation. But even more, inculcation means to teach something again and again. And also by the feeling they get with being around those who are practicing it. And as an example, there is a story I heard from one of my godbrothers who was teaching Krishna consciousness in Texas. And somebody was invited to come to one of his talks, and she was very interested in the subject matter after she heard his teachings. Came from a Christian family, as many people do in Texas. And she kept coming and becoming more interested. But her family was really against it, because they thought, this is way too different for us. How could it be talking about the same thing? And she then took some cooking classes, and her daughters, who were particularly against her being part of this sangha of devotees, came to pick her up from the house where she was taking the cooking classes. And the woman hadn't come out on time. So they went and knocked on the door to get her. And there were devotee women who were conducting the cooking class, and they invited them to come in. They were so enthusiastic about having them come in, even though they were hesitant. They're like, "I'm not coming in there." It's like, they didn't say that, but they were like, "Oh, all right." And they came in, and they were so overwhelmed by the mood of the devotees who were conducting them. They were just simple and nice. And when they came out, they told their mother, like, "Oh, that's who you're with?" It's like, well, I guess it's okay then. And people go a lot with their heart, how they feel about it. And we've seen that some people, they hold on to the context they came with. They'll like Krishna consciousness, but they'll keep one foot here, one foot there, and they'll go a whole lifetime, and that's what they can do. It's kind of a mystery in many ways, that how some people fully embrace and others don't. I mean, of course, Shastra talks about, Krishna says that the people who've done this in previous lives, they just sort of spring into it all of a sudden, right? He says that in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, that those who have in previous lives have purva samskar. They have an impression that this is what I do. And then when they come in contact with it in their next life, they're suddenly just, yeah, I'll take it. Because this is what I'm supposed to do. They have that nature. Other people may not have. And maybe they're starting their exposure in this life. And the next life, it's a long-term project. It's not just a one-time thing where, hey, it's seven weeks and, you should be part of this. So it's helpful to really create a space for everybody. Instead of saying, like, unless you're at this level, you're not really a devotee. But the way that Krishna talks about it, it's, hey, neha bikramanashosti pratyavaino nivitite swalpamapyas. His measurement is, if you do one molecule, and in some places he said, even if you do it accidentally, I'm still counting you. And it's like, me? I didn't do anything. It's like, no, you said Krishna, I heard you. but I said, Krishna, get out of here, Like, no, I'll count that. So, it's kind of a mystery, and that's part of in spreading a movement. It's an interesting prospect. How do you insert a movement? I mean, even within our own organization, we have movements within movements, and like, oh, I'm over here, you're over here. Like, what do you believe? What do you believe? And like, don't we believe the same thing? Not exactly. Humans are complex like that. So there's no one simple answer except for teach by example, like you do, and be really nice to people. Living entities like to be treated nicely. That's one thing. And if you feed them, your friend forever. That's why Prabhupada, he always fed people. He give prasadam. Even when he didn't have any money, he'd just get an apple and cut it up. It's like, here, everybody gets apples. Like, wow, I get apple? Fantastic. You don't forget that. So, yeah, embrace the mystery of it and be nice. Keep being nice. You're already nice. Just keep being the way you are. Sweet as a peach. And do the best you can. And it's amazing, too, because people leave and then they come back, too. I mean, if you live long enough, you see a lot of stuff. Right? Balabhadra Prabhu, Haribol. We've been around for a while. It's like 50 years for me this year. I've joined in Krishna consciousness. So, you see cycles. Things happen in cycles. And if you watch, some people come very sincerely to Krishna consciousness, then they leave. I have a really close friend and godbrother who was bosom buddy, right on the same page, same type of enthusiasm, and then all of a sudden it's like, nah, I think I'll do something else. What are you talking about? In 20 years, something else. Until, one day, just like, what was I thinking? Yeah, what were you thinking? And then, made a comeback. And when you see that, there is really no other place to go except for closer to Krishna. And when you look at the Srimad Bhagavatam, you find that it gives all the details so that you really can embrace uninterrupted, unmotivated service to God. You have to have the information in order to do that. And I had this realization reading the Bhagavatam. Every year we go to Govardhan Hill for Kartik, by Krishna's grace. We had 19 years in a row before the pandemic blocked us out of the Govardhan Hill scenario. But we just go to Govardhan Hill for one straight month and read Bhagavatam for 5 hours a day in the assembly of devotees. And that was our sole purpose of being there, hear Bhagavatam 5 hours a day. And I started realizing that Bhagavatam solves all your problems. Because there are several psychological barriers to being happy in life, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. 3, to be exact. He says, Vitaraga bhaya krodha manmaya mamupashrita bahavo jnana tapasa putamad bhavamagata. He says people are held up because of these 3 reasons. One is they're attached to matter, which is really stupid, but living entities get faked out because the reflection looks like reality. And the other one is fear. And that's understandable also. We get afraid because we're disconnected from our source, and then we start thinking that maybe I'm not really a person because we're not connected to the original person, and then we think like I'm insignificant. And plus, everything hurts. Whatever I do, in every relationship I have, it ends somehow. And so there must be no relationship, there must be no person. So then one becomes afraid of one's personal existence. This is another kind of darkness. And then the third is krodha. One becomes disturbed by the fact that there's not really a comprehensive way that anyone's ever presented to somebody a clear idea about devotion to God and why you're happy or unhappy, and therefore they become angry. Have you ever met an angry person? That anger manifests in a way, it's like, oh, there's no meaning in anything, any of this stuff. It's like nobody knows. You get postmodernism and all kinds of cynical movements that are anti religion or God and everything like that. God and science used to be married, and then science asked for a divorce, and they're not doing so well afterwards. In practical matters, even that we could question. But we use technology and we understand that it's based on sound principles, but it's been disjointed from its main purpose. So that these are the main problems, Krishna says. But you can overcome them because if you read the whole Bhagavatam, then you'll hear the solution to all of these psychological anomalies that we develop here. And it does it in a way by telling stories within stories within stories. And you hear about people who have these problems and then they overcome them with a Krishna conscious solution. And then psychologically you start to notice that those barriers are diminishing. I forget why I brought that up. What was that connected to? Can you take me back a step? Am I still answering your question? Yeah?
Maharaj was saying we need information to make that happen.
Yeah, so we have to have the right source of information. Otherwise, if you only get scanty information about this, you can have a sense of faith in it because it makes sense, but unless you're able to overcome these anomalies, actually, and enter deeply within it, and actually come to a higher level of realization in your practice. So there's different levels mentioned in the Shastra, like Shastra means scripture, the teachings. So there's the lowest level is called Kanishta, and then there's a Madhyama, and then there's Uttama. So these are just general categories, and they're described in different ways, but they're all based on one becoming a whole person and also developing solid, clear, strong faith. And actually faith in the English language sounds like, oh yeah, well that's not real. So it's better to go back to the Sanskrit root of it, which is shraddha. Shrad means the heart, and da is an active verb. It means where you place something. So faith, what we call faith, comes from the word shraddha, which means what you're putting your heart into. And everybody, Krishna says in the 17th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, puts their heart into something, because that's our nature. We always are into something because we're active. We're not dead stones. But what are you putting your heart into? So the Bhagavatam leads us to this natural conclusion that actually the place to put your heart is in service to Krishna, and explains exactly why. And then when that becomes strong, then as the Bhagavatam says, Tachstradhana muneyo jnana vairagya yuktaya pashyantya manichatmanam bhaktya shruta grihitaya. When you have this firm conviction by realization and having gotten knowledge and overcome the psychological blockades to being happy, as Krishna says, through hearing the Bhagavatam, then you see people actually awaken. I've watched it with people who come to join this very specific branch of spiritual knowledge, the Krishna consciousness movement. And when they start reading the Bhagavatam, like there's one woman actually who joined a little while ago. She's elderly, and she's a very sincere person. Had some disappointments in her life. Her husband died, and she's believed in God, but it was hard for her to hold on to her other practice because there wasn't enough information. And when she came to the Association of Devotees and started reading Bhagavatam, and I saw, she has little markers throughout the whole thing. She actually finished the first canto of the Bhagavatam, and she's a different person. She has noticeably changed. She has knowledge, and she has this firming of faith that's taking place in her heart. So one can't just rely on scanty information. One remains a kanishta, and as kanishtas can easily be unsteady and fall off from their faith or not embrace it completely, whereas those who develop more strong faith like madhyamas and uttamas, they become pillars that actually are able to support others because they have such strength. That was the longest answer I ever gave. Sorry. If my wife was here, she would have cut me off. Okay. I have time for one more question. Oh, we can have a little kirtan. Would that be okay? Is that reasonable, or are we going to have kirtan anyway after this?
After this, we'll have.
All right. Then that way is better, because that way I get one more question. Would you like to make one more question? Okay, good. Please.
I was wondering what the heart actually.
She was wondering about?
I was wondering what actually the heart means, because the term is used many times, also by Sriya Shapanishad. Is it something different from mind and intelligence and false ego, or is it consciousness, or what is it actually?
When you say the heart, when we say the heart?
The heart.
Yeah, you're right that these can seem like amorphous terms. There are distinctions between the mind and the intelligence, for instance, and combinedly they're called the Chitta, or the faculty through which we observe the world and able to decipher what's going on. We see somebody moving towards us and we can tell how far away they are and so forth. We have that type of apparatus. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna describes how the soul is within the heart and is the seat of consciousness. And so we have the material apparatus, which includes the mind, the intelligence, the false ego, sort of a software interface type of thing. And then we actually, as living beings, reside within the heart, and so does Krishna, Paramatma, because Krishna is very friendly. He likes us. And he comes with us everywhere, just so he's always there ready to see how he can help us. And so we have the spiritual aspect, where Krishna's there within the heart. And the Chitta is actually a material term. It's made up of the Mahatattva, the same thing everything else is made up for, but it's an instrument through which we can either, through purification, as Lord Chaitanya says, Cheto Darpanamarjanam, you purify that Chitta, and then you can actually see the image of Krishna through that apparatus. Or you use it to observe the external world, of the material world, and it's the medium through which all the information comes through the exterior senses, and then we stay absorbed in watching it on the screen of the Chitta. A lot of research done recently about the power of the heart, which talks about how there are more nerve endings, more sophisticated system there in the region of the heart than there is in the brain. And that so much of what we encounter in the world, we first feel, and then we rationalize it with our brain. It like goes here, here. And nothing. That's it. That's a brief, as brief a summary as I can give of the heart region. But you can just say that we are there in the heart. That's the place for where we feel, and it's also the Chitta is a description of the material apparatus through which we feel the world, but that can be purified and used in Krishna's service. I don't think that helped. I'd like to say that it's been a heartfelt experience coming to this Atlanta community. It's an amazing array of brilliant and very heartfelt devotees from many different places. So a glorious history here. It's a place, it's a tirtha where Srila Prabhupada has walked. And I'll never forget the visit here after so many years coming back. And I'm so grateful to all of you for your hospitality and your heartfelt friendship. And I'll be staying in touch. I saw some Bhagavad Gitas come in. Is there a announcement to be made?
Anyone wants to take a book or the mic?
Do we have a semblance of a report?
Yes, we do.
Okay. When are we going to mention it?
We're doing an announcement at the end, or we can do it now.
Why don't we do it now? We'll do it. May we just say what the scores were from yesterday, like how the devotees did?
Yes, we could definitely do that.
Okay.
There was an idea that because you're almost like the current embodiment of book distribution in ISKCON,
Haribol.
they wanted to have those Bhagavad Gitas autographed by you. Some of the people had an interest to get an autographed Bhagavad Gita from you. I don't know, what do you think about that idea?
I'm your humble servant.
Okay, so how many do you have there?
I have 6. I have more.
6 Bhagavad Gitas will be autographed by Vaisesika Prabhu, and you get to keep it in your altar and worship it and read it every day. So, 6 people, please, you have to stand up and line up real quick so you can get them. You have to go up front. You have to go quick before there's only 6 left. That's all.
Could I sign them right afterwards? Otherwise, it could take a little while. I mean, if you claim the Gita, then, huh?
It took me only a few 6 on it.
There was such an interest, so I thought, why not?
You want me to do it now? Okay.
And then I'd like to request Jayanti Bhai to please come forward. Jayanti Balaram for the Arati. We'll announce it after. Okay, and then once this book signing is over, then we will
Do a chapter there.
Okay.
hear the book scores from yesterday.
We also have our family business available in the back here, which are a lot of hard work.
Hey, Krishna.
So these are for sale.
Can you speak up a little louder so everyone can
Our
hear?
family business is available for sale.